Chuck Wendig is one of the most prolific authors I've had the privilege of reading. His works span everything from horror to science fiction to writing advice to Star Wars. Yeah, Star Wars. If you review his bibliography, you'll see my description of his efforts as prolific is an understatement, but it's his prescience that made me want to invite him on the show. It's not an exaggeration on my end to say that I've begun to regard Chuck's work alongside the Isaac Asimovs and George Orwells of the literary world. Chuck, thanks for taking time away from the writing desk to talk with me.
Oh, thank you. Ironically, I'm still sitting at my writing desk, so I'm just shackled here. It's fine.
That's cool. As long as the chains are out of view, we'll be okay.
Yeah, yeah,
So let me put this bluntly, as possibly bluntly as I can. You wrote a book published in 2019 that predicted the rapid spread of a deadly pandemic. In
yeah,
the story, the US government used an artificial intelligence to kind of help scientists and the government officials try to understand worst case scenarios, and it's called Wanderers, and
yeah.
it was a super eerie read for me because I read it right before COVID-19 began.
Ooh.
And so how did you handle the fiction that you wrote about becoming truth, and did you intentionally try to do some forecasting or future telling?
Well, it was weird, and I still get emails about it. So, like, that's the number one thing. Um, I didn't intend for anything like that because, as a science fiction writer, horror writer, whatever category I land in, we're not really trying to prognosticate the future. Sometimes it's framed that way, but we're always talking about like what's going on now. And with Wanderers, you know, I had all of these anxieties and things I was worried about in the world, and so as a both greedy and lazy writer, I was like, what if I just mash all of the anxieties together and I make them kiss and see what happens? And so the anxieties kind of formed this giant anxiety robot, this Voltron monster, and Wanderers was born. But I wasn't really trying to come up with anything new per se. Like, bat-based pandemic is something we know can happen and is not odd. The zoonotic jump there is not odd. The political violence was, while it was going to reach a fever pitch, after that book came out. Obviously, it was something that has happened before and will happen again. I think the only thing that really like freaked me out in terms of the comparison to reality and what happened in the book was in the book there is, as you note, an artificial intelligence called Black Swan that predicts the coming pandemic, and in reality there was an algorithm called Blue Dot that pegged it by about a week. And I was like, boy, that's like, because it's like black and blue, Black Swan, Blue Dot, 2 words a piece. And I was like, that's too close. So, maybe it is my fault. I might have unleashed a pandemic. And if that's the case, I apologize profusely. Mea culpa.
It's such an interesting thing because I remember you posting on social media saying, oh, I didn't mean for this to be so accurate,
Yeah.
but here you are. So it leads me to think about futurism and
Yeah.
futurists because it's sort of a term that in some circles it gets derided, in others it's seen as essential. And so most fiction authors don't go into writing with prognostication in mind, like you said, but you've kind of ended up there. So
Yeah.
so because that's where you've been,
Yeah.
how did the interplay between science and society at large kind of end up pushing you into that futurist sort of category?
Ooh, that's a good question. First of all, the futurism thing is interesting because it was the lead character of my novel Invasive. Hannah Stander is a futurist who's sort of getting ahead of a coming problem with, as it turns out, weird genetically modified ants that eat people's skin. But in that story um, is a an Elon Musk analog who turns out to essentially be the evil person in the story. And I was like, man, I called that one too. Crap, damn it. So the intersection of science and reality is mostly just for me. Again, not a desire to prognosticate and figure this stuff out so much as I'm just really interested in these things from my own both fascination and, again, my own sort of anxieties. Like, I try to study the things that terrify me, in the sense that I think then that helps us be less terrified by them and be more prepared for them. and not like in an apocalypse prepper, in the bunker kind of way. Just I mean in a sort of a broad spectrum, kind of like, hey, I understand how the world works. If I'm scared of planes and turbulence, reading about that will actually help as much as it's flying is weird. Um, so for me, those books are an expression of that. But I think just by being a writer and computing all of this weird stuff and jamming it in my head, sometimes the stuff that outputs from the input tends to look like predictions.
Right, right. And I mean, one of the things that I appreciate about your writing is that you're really good at capturing different perspectives and showing them through your characters. And so you do the science people well, you do the techies well, you do the everyday average Joes really well. And so it makes it seem less like it just lives in the fictional world, and it sort of does that leap over into, well, a lot of this could happen. So congratulations, you're good at what you do. It's also scary. So also
Right.
congratulations.
Yeah.
So thinking on from Wanderers to its sequel, Wayfarers, and that story, just for folks who haven't read it, it's the people who survived the apocalypse, pandemic, AI takeover craziness, white supremacist uprising in Wanderers. And so I just am wondering how you see technology playing out. Now, in Wayfarers, obviously, there's no antibiotics, there's no cars, big commercial farms don't exist. And we have hyper specialization today. I mean, in our roles. I mean, you're a writer, I'm a scientist, and we don't also have to be farmers and hunters and gatherers and warriors. So in the world of Wayfarers, everything's within like a 5 mile radius. And so you use the barter system. And I mean, what is it that you see technology could do in a society where all the rules have broken down and we don't have access to the things, the hyper specialization that we do today?
Yeah, it's interesting because in uh, that book, the town of Uray is sort of the nexus for all of the sleepwalkers who survived. Wanderers are now in Wayward, and they are the sort of brain trust for what was handpicked by this artificial intelligence. So they have something of a leg up on the ability to be that specialization, and bring that specialization to bear in a collapsing world, in a broken civilization. So they're the ones who can understand how old tech can still get working again, and how do you even just bring something like electricity back in total darkness. So, but it does, you also find out that there's more sinister things going on with artificial intelligence, as it turns out. And there's, I guess, another fun prediction that came true is I didn't really think we were going to be cresting a wave of weird, artificial intelligence stuff going on, but here we are. Yeah, so it was always just a fun challenge to think about, both in a sort of entertainment way, because I think there's something luridly entertaining about the disaster side of things, like how would we survive and how would we do this. But to kind of go back to the comment earlier about like disaster prepping and apocalypse preppers, like part of the goal with something like Wayward was writing a story that was very explicitly countering this idea that you can be like, it's just me and my wife and my family down in the bunker and we're just going to survive the end times. Like, no, you're not. First of all, why would you want to? Community is literally everything. It's what we have in this world. But also the community, as has been proven time and again, is how we actually get through things like this. Usually in crisis, community comes together as opposed to breaks apart. And so much fiction, the zombie fiction, the apocalypse fiction, is all about how society fractures. And I didn't really want it to be that way. Obviously, there's some of that, with factions and white supremacy and so forth rising, but I really wanted it to be about how communities and people come together and find a way forward through that. And that, to me, is how this sort of technology futurist aspect sort of comes through, is these people bringing it together for each other as opposed to just in isolation.
So that actually dovetails really well into
All
the
right.
next question, which was obviously a lot of what you write about is pretty intense. I mean, the books that you write that I've written, you write that I've read, I can talk
No, I hope you
instead of
can write them. Yeah,
I
if you
well,
if you
yeah.
will write them, I will accept that deal. That's a good deal.
Oh man, I can write nonfiction. Fiction has yet to be seen for me, but we will say that I've read a lot of your work. Not all of it. I still have to. I need more time.
I've
But
written too much. It's okay. I don't fault anyone for having not read my way too large bibliography.
It's pretty great though, but what I've noticed is that you do have a lot of this, the darker, the scarier parts of life on Earth in a lot of your work. So what are the most positive human traits that you see coming from really terrible events, either fictional or in real life? And how do those positive human traits that sort of seem to shine through, especially in the work that you've written, how do those speak to the ideals of science, of
Ooh.
actually like being scientific about how we approach the world?
Well, community for one, I think is really again with Wayward, and to a lesser degree, Wanderers is a huge aspect of that. I don't think science works well in isolation. I think obviously it works well when it's tested rigorously with and against other people. That's why we do what we do as a sort of a society and civilization, is to test these things for each other and to learn more about each other and so forth. I think found family is another thing. That kind of comes through the work, especially Black River Orchard is very much about a found family sort of structure emerging. As to how that relates to science, I mean, I don't know, but I'm sure that working in an environment and having spoken to a number of scientists, they I think feel like their cohorts and compadres are certainly part of that found family structure, and can be at least to some degree, and go maybe a little beyond just professional entanglements. And so these people are, because you understand them. It's like, when I find other writers, there's a prevailing theory sometimes from some people that writers shouldn't be friends with writers. You should be friends with, like, quote unquote real people, like, out in the world, so you learn about things. But for me, writers have to have friends who are writers, because we're the only people who understand the really weird stuff that we go through. Even my family, who are great and I love very much, if I get into the weeds on, like, publishing and writing stuff, there that you can kind of see, like, the gaze disconnect, and like, oh, okay, like, we're out. But when I'm talking to other writers, they're like, they totally are laser focused and understand exactly the weird nitty gritty that I'm talking about. And I assume, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but that science and scientists certainly have a similar vibe, that there's just some things that people who are not practicing in that way maybe can relate to and understand. And especially as you get down into specializations, there's probably definitely some pretty unique things that just other people, the normies, so to speak, who are just like, I have no idea what you're talking about, but your friends in the industry and the friends in the business, and in the practice and disciplines, understand that stuff.
Yeah, if I start telling people that I've figured out and, named and described 13 different kinds of undersea lava flows for my masters, they're like, "Oh my god," their eyes roll back in their head, cuz all people want to know is the lava going to kill me? And I'm like,
Yeah,
"Well, when it's 5 miles undersea, the answer is no."
yeah,
So,
yeah,
that's it. That ends it. So you
yeah,
get it. And
yeah.
so let's swing to AI again.
Oh,
So you kind of present it as a double-edged sword, and then with Wayward, it's very different than Wanderers, the first book of those two. And you've also used AI and mentioned it in a few other works. So
oh, yes, yeah.
so just, I'd love to get your take on what you see as limits, dangers, possible benefits of AI, that you can imagine, because that is your job. You are Mr. Imagination. So I'd love to hear.
Yeah, AI is one of those things where, like any of our great powers and technologies, whether you're talking about splitting atoms or you're talking about a sharpened piece of metal that we turn into a knife, can always be used for great benefit. I'm going to cut bread and serve my friends, or I'm going to stab them and take their bread, or obviously, what you do with fire and nuclear power, whatever it is, there's always a sort of a double-sided coin there. So artificial intelligence is very clearly that, and I think we're seeing that. And my preference would remain that artificial intelligence do the things that the human mind is not really capable of doing, whether that's gazing upon an entire network of health data and figuring out trends that maybe an individual alone can't see, or whether it's making sure that my Roomba does not track dog poop across the carpet, and, like, maybe it can figure that out for me. That'd be great. But I don't know why we're also hyper focused on artificial intelligence taking over human positions, especially the human positions like art and writing that, traditionally speaking, people would like to do, and would like to be free to do. So if artificial intelligence could pick up the other slack, that would be fine. You know what? Like, I would like to know when my milk is running out of the fridge. If it could help me do that, that would be super great. less than like write my books for me. That part I don't want it to do.
Yeah, it's funny that people immediately jump to, let's let the AI take all the fun stuff. And I'm like, no, no, no.
Yeah, that's why we do this.
Yeah, exactly. So, you've written so many things, and I just, I really like the way that you represent science and technology in one of your books called Zeros.
Oh,
Um,
thank you.
yeah, you had so much versatility as a thinker and a writer because the book involves a lot of technical work. It involves hackers, and
Yeah,
that is Hollywood's version of a hacker is somebody connects a computer to a system and then brings down the government in 5 minutes.
yes, yeah,
That's not how it is.
yeah.
You manage to convey, like, I don't know, you got your brain in sync with people who have very highly technical knowledge and a very distinct lifestyle. And yet, how are you able to do that? How are you able to get into the head of a very specialized profession and then also use your imagination to make a really compelling story?
First of all, like I've known a number of hacker type folk throughout my years, and I used to like pre-internet. I used to run like bulletin board systems, like the old dial-up, 2400 baud, 1200 baud kind of system. So, even back then, I was connecting with and meeting hacker folks who were kind of or phone freakers, like people who were like really sort of all about getting into systems and learning how to manipulate both the systems and the people to get into the systems. And so I always found that interesting even then. Um, but I think there's like a good line between like making hacking look super easy, like, oh, the helicopter's shooting me, I would need to just hack the helicopter, and it's like goes to 100, it's like ding, we hacked the helicopter, and then it explodes. Versus like obviously hacking too can be really boring. Like it's just code, just like tickety like typing. It'd be as exciting as watching me write a book, on a camera. So, you're trying to find that sort of narrative balance between being authentic to what's going on and what reality is, but also be tense and exciting and have it be something that's intriguing and interesting to the reader. For me, it's like anytime I deal with like reality based information that needs to be conveyed in a fictional, entertaining way, I sort of take a tweak on the two truths and a lie. Like I'm always trying to tell like several true things that will bridge me to the complete fictional fabrication horror sci-fi thing that I'm going to bring to the table, and not just be like, which again, obviously I have written Star Wars and love Star Wars, but it's not just like, I don't know, it's a sword with light, like who cares? Like that's awesome, but when you're kind of trying to write these books, you want it to make sense and feel like it's a real thing, especially when it's set in the now and it's supposed to be something people believe in, not just that they take on faith. So for me, it's always like building in those like real details, and then eventually being like, we have left the real details behind, but hopefully you can still follow me naturally in this connect the dots way to this really nightmare stuff I'm writing.
Yeah, and I think that you do a really interesting job of that, because the humans at the heart of all of your books, you're correct. Community is a very strong underlying theme, and then what happens when you don't have it? But the people are so real, and I think that's what you get from a like a Michael Crichton, Stephen King, Asimov. Asimov is so futuristic. Like
So
he,
yeah,
to me, he's just like out there. But like Orwell, you can see that there aren't that many leaps between where we are and where we could be. And so your work has resonated with me quite a bit, obviously, and I'm sure it does for a lot of our listeners, because you capture that zeitgeist in a genuine way. Um, but one of the things that I've really noticed is you've been able to portray the radicalization and like hatred and white supremacy kind of coming back to the fore. Um, it's really like you say the quiet parts out loud in your writing, and they need to be said because people need to see that this stuff can fester.
yeah,
So yeah, and I first like became familiar with your work when I was running for Congress in 2018 to also
right.
shed light on things. And I've interacted with you a bunch on Twitter, on Instagram, and so I wanted to know if immersing yourself in social media in that landscape, which obviously you just said you've been part of since BBS days, is that kind of like a twist on the intellectual salons that they used to have in the early 20th century, or is it like a pressure cooker, like Manhattan Project style thing? Is that why you engage so much online?
Yeah. Ooh, yeah. Wow. Sometimes it's those things. Sometimes it's just a distraction, time waster. Sometimes it's a that sort of aquarium. Like I'm pressed up against the glass trying to figure out what's in there. Sometimes it's a tonguing a broken tooth kind of a thing. Like you're like, I feel like everything is bad, and I want to just keep poking at it and figuring out why and see if it makes it feel better. And it traditionally does not. But sometimes you learn some things in the process. Sometimes it's like that, just hyper vigilance, right? Because we're like living in this very strange new world with not just everything. I mean, obviously, every time in history is its own special brand of weirdness, right? I do recognize that, but it does feel like since 2016 and into the pandemic, things have just been maybe a little extra off the rails. And so, that hypervigilance sometimes is like, I just want to be like staring at it to see if it'll start making some sense. And I think then the fiction becomes kind of to some degree an extension, and hopefully a healthy extension of that hypervigilance. That's like, I am trying to make sense of it, staring at it, but then the fiction is like taking it like clay and seeing if there's something there to be molded and shaped into some kind of sense.
It's interesting to me too, because the solitary writer vibe is definitely one that we've all heard about, that like lock
Oh
yourself
yeah.
in your room with the yellow wallpaper and get
Yep.
to it.
Yeah.
But
We're doomsday preppers, narratively speaking. Yeah.
yes, and so it just makes me think of Wayward again, and how I think what I really got from that like post-apocalyptic world is that you kind of underscored humanity's commitment to survival and innovation and engineering and like a shared struggle. Um, is that the sort of like ray of light that is that one we can take from the science fiction future, maybe?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, and again, that's why I think I go, I don't want to say out of my way, because I think this is true with a lot of science fiction, but I make special effort to ensure that it's not just like the bad side. Like, well, science is bad and it unleashes bad things and we can't trust it. Because I think that's the sort of path of how you get to be like, vaccines are actually full of tiny robots and they're going to kill us. Even though, admittedly, I'm also using the tiny robots who might kill us thing, not in vaccines. But yeah, the people and the disciplines they're bringing to the table, and the wisdom and the intelligence, and the discipline, I think, is definitely something that presents the hopeful side of that equation, as opposed to the disaster, doom saying, doom scrolling kind of vibe that you can get from some things.
Very true. So there is a question that I know. I think my guess is it's going to be opening the all the cans of all the worms. And
Uh-oh.
this is because we are the Union of Concerned Scientists. We are
Yes.
concerned, and so
Yeah.
I ask all of my guests. In this case, it will be Chuck Wendig. Why
Yeah.
are you concerned?
How long do we have? Do we have like a couple hours?
Go off.
I
Go
mean, yeah,
off.
like, yeah. Wanderers was definitely like my Bible of the concerns. Like it was definitely, but then like the weird thing was when like an actual pandemic hit, after having written about an actual pandemic, like my sort of anxiety relaxed. It was really weird. Like at the start of the pandemic, it was almost like my anxiety was taking a victory lap. Like it was like, see, like I told you, and then you were right. Like it high fives everybody. You can now take a nap and lock down. So I guess the pandemic thing is a worry is now off the table, just if only because it's fresh. Um, but like one of the things, like outside of the giant monolithic concern of climate change, but the post antibiotic age is one of the ones that sort of gets me, because like we really need antibiotics, and the fact that sometimes the search for new antibiotics is halted by basic capitalism. Like, well, there's not as much money in it, so we just don't look. And you're like, yeah, but like there has to be money in society existing, so like maybe just get that part done. Like I know they have. I just saw yesterday, the day before, that they had new new potential gonorrhea antibiotic on the horizon, which is desperately needed given the resistant forms that are out there now. So stuff like that is always like, you know when I write Wayward and it's the end of the world, you understand why antibiotics are hard to deal with. But like we shouldn't have that problem now. in current society where antibiotics stop working and we're just like, whatever, too bad, good luck with your cut on your face from shaving. Like, ooh. So that's one that still kind of like burrows. I'm like, can we just fix that? Be good.
Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty intense. Just because it's true. I mean, it's these
Yeah.
little things we take for granted, and when you remove them, what do you have left?
Hmm.
So that's pretty good concern, and I like
Thanks.
it because now I'm waiting for your next book, which will probably be about the lack of antibiotics.
Don't tempt me. Don't
Yeah,
tempt me.
drug resistant bacteria takes over the
Yeah.
world.
Yeah.
So you heard it here first, folks. But in more real world matters, tell us about your most recent book and where what it's called. Should people read it? I'm gonna guess the answer is yes.
Well, I mean, yeah, that's up to them, but I'd like them to. It's called Black River Orchard. It's set where I live in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. It's about a man who brings back from the brink a secret heirloom apple called he calls the ruby slipper. But there was a reason it was sort of left to the margins of history and darkness, and there is a curse afoot, and it slowly begins to take over the town and county in which this new orchard grows. So it's about the people affected by these strange new apples and the people who are not affected by them and who effectively form resistance against this strange new fruit.
That is pretty cool. I haven't read it yet, so I'm excited. Because I've read, your sci-fi kind of leaning stuff, and then I read Book of Accidents, which is
Oh yeah.
not sci-fi, definitely horror and
Some
very.
people say it's sci-fi. Though. That's the weird. Some
It's
people are
true.
like, "Well, it's sci-fi." I'm like, "Well,
Yeah, because I mean,
kind of."
I could see it, but I put it more in the horror line of
Yeah,
things
same.
versus, like Wayward or Wanderers or
Yeah, yeah.
Zeros or yeah. I mean, you've got such a vast array of things you've written, and it's great. And so I really appreciate you coming on to my little science program and talking about this because
Oh, it's my pleasure.
it's your science fiction is an important way of thinking about these current modern real world challenges. And so we need everybody on board. We need the
Yeah,
writers and the artists and the poets and the scientists and the engineers. It's all that's how we keep our society moving. So
yeah. It's all
thank you.
connected. That STEM stuff. Yeah, absolutely. It's all connected.
Yeah, yeah. So thank you so much, Chuck. And that's all for now,
Thank
folks.
you. Thanks, everybody.